Hey guys, I recently made a custom Super Mario Bros. Wonder level called Skeblaster Scurry. Now, you might be wondering, what the heck is a Skeblaster? Well, this little guy is called a skedaddler, and apart from skedaddling, their main gimmick is that they occasionally shoot this acorn projectile at the player. So ever since custom actor editing was figured out in Wonder, I've had this idea of taking a bullet bill blaster and making it shoot these skedaddler acorns instead, hence the name Skeblaster. What makes this an interesting gimmick is that whereas bullet bills fly straight through walls and blocks, these acorns can hit and destroy blocks. So that's why I decided that apart from Skeblasters and Skedaddlers, the level should also feature these yellow rotating blocks and on-off blocks, both of which can be hit by the acorns. So now let's talk about how the level design process went. This level uses the original game's Shining Falls level theme, and with that I've now made a custom level using all of the original game's world themes. It's not like it was ever specifically my goal to do that, but since I do want there to be a fair bit of thematic variety to the levels that I show on my channel, things have just naturally sort of ended up that way. It has actually been a bit of a fun challenge to find enemies and mechanics that maybe didn't originally appear in a certain level theme in the original game, but still fit within that theme regardless. In the case of this level, none of the main mechanics ever appeared in the original game's Shining Falls world, and yet I don't think any of them feel out of place either. I should mention though, I am hoping to eventually make most of my levels more thematically unique. If you've only ever seen my custom Wonder levels, you may not know this, but apart from making custom levels for older 2D Mario games, I also used to be known for making custom level themes using backgrounds and tilesets and whatever. And my vague plan is to eventually go through a bunch of my levels and think of more unique themes that fit with what I've designed, but are also distinct from the areas seen in the original game. In general, it has been difficult for me to focus on aspects of the eventual mod that these levels should be included in that aren't just the main levels themselves. For example, I keep coming up with ideas for badge challenges or break time levels or whatever, but I haven't found an excuse to actually make any so far. Anyways, let's actually talk about this level now. If you're an avid watcher of the channel, you might be slightly confused by something about this level, which is the fact that I'm using on-off blocks. As I explained when I made Hop Stop Swamp, an older level which uses on-off rails but not blocks, on-off blocks in Super Mario Bros. Wonder can't normally be used in custom levels because they rely on a hard-coded collision system. However, with all the recent breakthroughs in actor editing, Thea actually stumbled upon a solution to this problem on accident, which is to make the on-off blocks bindable. This, for some reason, gives them back their collision. I did run into another problem with the on-off blocks in this level, but I'm actually saving that for an upcoming video, because just like the thing with the lava slopes in my previous level, it was a gigantic mess. Something I had difficulties with in this level is the way skedaddlers work. As I'm sure you've noticed, I like making my levels relatively compact, some might even call them cramped. I just don't like the big sections of empty space that Nintendo often leaves in their levels, though at least they improved on that with Wonder, likely because of the whole lack of multiplayer collision thing. Anyways, so the thing about skedaddlers is that they thrive on big empty sections. If you look at their level in the original game, there's basically nothing going on except wide open areas for you to chase the skedaddlers in. So throughout my level, I occasionally found clever ways of both allowing skedaddlers to roam around and still give the player some other stuff to do on screen. But I also sometimes just had to cope with a section being designed for the player to just run through it, which goes completely against my typical level design style. One of my main goals with this level from a meta perspective was to subvert a lot of the tropes that I feel like my levels have been falling into more and more recently. The majority of my levels feature a bit of vertical camera scrolling and are very repetitive when it comes to where the purple 10 coins are placed and whether those appear in bonus rooms or not. So with this level, I challenged myself to make the entire thing completely straight and to also shake things up in regards to the purple 10 coins. Whereas I normally put a pretty elaborate bonus room with a purple 10 coin towards the end of my level, in this level I instead made the first purple 10 coin a bit of a puzzle. I still made the later two tank coins pretty complicated as well, but those just relied on background areas as opposed to full-on bonus rooms. In hindsight, I wonder if I could have made this entire level without using the rotating yellow blocks. Their functionality of temporarily losing collision when they're hit by something can also basically be recreated using on-off blocks, and they aren't really vital to any of the level's key setups. The way I think of their usage in the level is basically like a stepping stone mechanic. They're a bit easier to wrap your head around than all of the crazy on-off block stuff. So they serve as an element that introduces the player to similar ideas as what the on-off blocks are used for, without actually needing to use on-off blocks. The flip side of this is that they become less and less relevant as the level goes on, but I don't think that's a bad thing really. They're exactly the kind of mechanic that I'm sure I'll use again in a future level. In fact, I've already used them before in my very first custom level. Something that I usually try to pay at least a bit of attention to is my level's color scheme. But in the case of this level, that hasn't really ended up being the case because there is basically no consistency to the colors featured in this level. There's the red and blue on-off blocks, the yellow rotating blocks, and the orange skedaddlers and skeblasters. I did consider changing the color of the on-off blocks to match the level's theming, but the way their colors clash with everything else also helps them to stand out, which is a good thing for such a crucial mechanic. So in the end, I decided to sacrifice a bit of this level's visual appeal in favor of easier readability. What's quite tricky about making a level that relies on-off blocks very heavily is that you have to keep track of which blocks are likely turned on when. For example, if I want a certain section to revolve around the player activating the red blocks, then I somehow have to make sure the player is most likely to arrive at that section with the blue blocks activated. In some cases, I achieved this by adding a very cut and dry system where I just block the player if they don't have the right block color turned on, but I also often had to extrapolate from how players are likely to play to determine which block type is most likely to be active where. This level's checkpoint flag is actually affected by gravity, which I achieved by attaching it to a custom assistant gravity object that was made by Thea. As far as I understand, this custom object is just an edit of an existing actor that is affected by gravity, only with the collision and model removed, making it invisible. Because I placed it on the same block as the midway flag, it is actually the thing that falls down when the block gets hit, and the checkpoint just mimics that movement. It's pretty cool. Despite what I mentioned earlier about wanting to potentially change the visuals of the levels I've made at a later date, I do actually try to design my levels to fit their theme in terms of tiling. So the Shining Falls levels in the original game tend to feature a lot of these triangular semi-solids which are sometimes even floating in mid-air, and that's also something that I carried over into my own level. Another way I tied the level's design into its theme is with this level's unique coin formations. Like I've talked about for some of my previous levels, I tend to make most of my levels include one specific type of coin formation over and over again, and these sometimes even tie into the level's theme. In the case of this level, I repeatedly made rhombus-shaped coin formations, which match the rhombus shapes that are featured all over Shining Falls. Something I've been meaning to find an excuse to use for the longest time now is a playable background area. The reason I'd barely used these before this level is because I generally only want to use them if them being a background area ties into gameplay, instead of this purely being a visual thing. There are loads of examples of playable background areas throughout the original game which could have just as easily been completely separate bonus rooms, but that's just not how I tend to design my levels. What makes the ones in my level justify their existence is that on-off block states carry through from background areas to the main level area and vice versa. So for the level's first background area, I placed an on-off block next to a Skeblaster, meaning throughout this section the on-off block state switches repeatedly, and then the player has the option to go into the background area to prevent the on-off block from being triggered, which allows them to get the second purple 10 coin, which is in the foreground. The way the player can get to the background area area, by the way, is by entering a pipe whilst standing on top of a falling Skeblaster. Just like they do in Super Mario Maker, bullet bill blasters, and therefore also my custom Skeblasters, have gravity in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. So there are a few sections throughout the level where the player has to make a cannon drop down by hitting a rotating block or something like that. Which is a bit of a janky Mario Maker-y setup, but it also just made a lot of sense with the mechanics the level has. Just like in the original game's Skedaddler level, I attached my level's Wonder Flower to a Skedaddler that the player has to chase in order to activate the effect. Because this was a section where it was basically vital that the player would ignore everything else and just chase the Skedaddler, this ended up being one of those parts where I had to grit my teeth and allow the level to be a bit boring and empty for roughly 1.5 screens. The interesting thing about putting the Wonder Flower on a moving enemy is that the place where the Wonder effect gets triggered can vary depending on how the player interacts with the Skedaddler. Catching up to one is pretty tough without using one of the badges that allows you to move faster, but the level does feature plenty of Koopas, so throwing a shell at the Skedaddler is an option. Therefore, after the Wonder effect was nearly done, I ended up going back to this empty area and adding a little bit extra to it in its Wonder form in case the player happens to trigger the effect early. The Wonder effect itself is probably the most custom effect I've done yet. There's nothing in the original game even remotely like this. Something cool about Super Mario Bros. Wonder compared to previous 2D Mario games I've modded is how, using an area switch local, you can make the game detect the movement of basically any object or enemy. And since this level's two main gimmicks are Skedaddlers and blocks that can become solid or not depending on a certain condition, the Wonder effect combined these two into one mechanic by making the Skedaddler's proximity activate special blocks. Throughout the level creation process, I used the original game's simple yellow question mark switch blocks, which are used in the World 6 airship, but after the fact I swapped those for more special looking orange blocks. For each individual block that a Skedaddler can activate, I had to place the block, place an area switch above it, link the area switch to both the Skedaddler and the block, and then link the block to the Wonder tag so it only spawns during the Wonder effect. That was fine, except because the section ended up featuring over 100 of these blocks, I had to repeat that same setup over and over again, which got pretty tiresome. But whatever, honestly, seeing people's reaction to custom stuff like this, especially custom Wonder effects, makes the arduous process 100% worth it. So it was around this point of the level creation process that I ran into the aforementioned big problem involving on-off blocks. The solution to which required me to go back through the level and replace all the blocks I'd used so far. The slightly difficult thing to design around for this Wonder effect was the fact that the range at which Skedaddlers move away from the player is larger than the range at which they spawn the blocks around them. Of course, I had control over that second type of range, so I could have made the blocks spawn around them in an even wider formation. However, that would have required making them activate the blocks 10 tiles away from them to either side, which is so large that it covers almost the entire screen, which totally defeats the point of the mechanic. So instead, I ended up designing this section in a way to where the player is never required to stand on Skedaddler blocks that aren't up against a wall that prevents the Skedaddler from moving. In fact, in general, there's only one section where the player has to stand on Skedaddler blocks to progress, because that's the only section where I included a Skedaddler spawner. So in all the other sections, the mechanic is basically just an optional thing for collecting coins or whatever. Though I don't really think that's a problem, since this is also a nice and safe way of introducing the mechanic before it becomes more crucial in the second half of the section. In general, one of the big struggles of this level was to keep track of all of the mechanics and make sure none of them ever disappear for too long. I've already talked about how this was the case for the yellow rotating blocks, but during the Wonder effect, there are entire sections that only use Skedaddlers. Of course, the main gimmick of the Wonder effect, the blocks that are activated by the Skedaddlers, are basically an evolution of the on-off block mechanic, but still, I couldn't help but insert some sections that used actual on-off blocks in the second half of the Wonder effect, and similarly I also managed to integrate another Skeblaster and some rotating blocks. Because the Wonder Seed is attached to yet another Skedaddler, just like the Wonder Flower was, I couldn't just count on the player being in one specific location when the Wonder effect ends. Therefore, just to be safe, I decided the level would spawn in some extra blocks that could potentially prevent the player from falling in a pit right after the Wonder effect ends. It's a bit of a janky solution, but honestly also very in line with how the original game handled stuff like this. It is funny, by the way, that the main custom object for this level, the Skeblaster, is yet another custom actor that's basically a stationary version of an existing enemy, just like how I previously made stationary Kerpops and Shovers. I guess I just really like the predictability that comes with removing the movement from an existing enemy. Whereas Skedaddlers can move all over the place, Skeblasters are simple and reliable. Of course, the section that normally contains the Wonder effect also needs to work if you don't trigger the Wonder Flower, and I'm pretty happy with what I managed to figure out for this non-Wonder section in this case. Here I did use more of these Skeblasters and on-off blocks, and 1 or 2 sections require the player to jump on one of the Skeblaster acorns to progress. That isn't the most interesting gimmick, but it's fine for a section like this that most people will likely never play either way. In fact, it is always a bit strange making these non-Wonder sections, knowing that their design flow just doesn't really matter because most people, even people trying to 100% the mod, will likely never play through this section. In a way, if the level design of such a section isn't that great, you could almost say that's a punishment for the player for missing an obvious collectible in the form of the Wonder Flower. But I don't know, the way this divide between Wonder and non-Wonder sections works in this game is very strange and unlike anything in previous Mario games, I think, and to this day I don't really know whether I like it or not. The way this last part of the level ended up working out made it to where I sort of made one final section revolving around each main mechanic in turn. So the Wonder Effect section is the finale for the Skedaddlers, then there's another background area bonus room for the third purple 10 coin, which exclusively relies on on-off blocks, and I ended up designing the goal pole in a way to where it uses a Skeblaster and some rotating yellow blocks. You'd think ideally the end of a level features one big crescendo that involves all mechanics at the same time, but with a level like this where all the mechanics are relatively complicated and the level basically features combinations of them throughout the entire thing, I think it's fine to do something a bit different for the end. As always, I place most of the level's decorations right at the very end. This took a long time, not only because the Shining Falls theme has a relatively large variety of decorations, but also because this level ended up being pretty massive. Of all of the levels I've made so far, this one is actually by far the largest in terms of its horizontal length. The reason it still doesn't actually take super long to play through is because there are quite a few sections where you're just expected to run after a Skedaddler, and because there aren't any vertical sections. On top of the typical Shining Falls decorations, I also included a few acorn decorations which are used in the original game's Skedaddler level. I specifically tried to place those in spots where it would make sense for acorns to have fallen from Skedaddlers or Skeblasters, and I think that's kind of a fun detail. And yeah, that's it. The level is done, so let's have a look at it in-game. Alright, so here we are. Over to the left here, there's a bit of a random secret. This is actually the only, like, special camera movement throughout this entire level with how that's revealed. Apart from that, like I talked about during the time-lapse, this level is actually a complete, like, straight shot in terms of its camera movement and whatnot. Which is kind of abnormal for my levels, but that's actually why I did it. Because that way it makes the other levels that have more complicated like diagonal and vertical camera movements and stuff stand out a bit more. And so therefore, yeah, this level is a bit of a trend breaker, I suppose. Over here there's a bit of a strange puzzle with this Skedaddler here, just trying to have something happen with the Skedaddlers and the on-off blocks. And I suppose if you really want to, you could hit this on-off block again and then like go back. But you just have to like go back and reset the section. You wouldn't be like soft locked or anything. There's a bunch of different stuff going on here, like, oh god, there we go. Yeah, with all the different things that spawn, and you can get the hidden one up there and whatnot. But I think that's fine. It's kind of funny to sometimes overwhelm the player a little bit. Here I make use of the fact that these on-off blocks that I set up for this level can actually be moved. And there's also a bit of a semi-puzzle here where you have to jump through here in order to go to this bonus room. And yeah, this bonus room is the only one of its type in this level, and it's also relatively complicated. So I can imagine this might be a bit like off-putting for people playing this level for the first time because of the way the timing here works with the the skedaddler like that. It can be a bit tricky to pull off on the first attempt. However, I do think it's also like relatively simple if you know what you're doing, so I don't think it's like that complicated of a section. So I think it's fine to have this as a first bonus room once again to kind of break the mold of my previous levels where I tend to have more complicated bonus rooms later on. Here I make use of this slightly janky looking, that thing with the rotating yellow block and the blaster. It looks a bit strange, but it just makes so much sense with the mechanics. I really like here how this is sort of like an ambush section where you sort of get caught off guard by all the different skedaddler acorns, but then the skedaddler activates the on-off block that makes that section sort of a lot easier to get through in the end. And now we make more use of the rotating yellow blocks, and now they're a bit more of a threat because they're over a pit, which is sort of a nice escalation of the mechanics right before the midway flag. This section can be a bit tricky as well with all the different things going on, because we also introduced the on-off blocks in the mix and whatever. But there we go, now we're halfway through. And I also have a lot of these like these blocks here with like the Wonder Buds and whatnot throughout this level, just to like, well, I guess sometimes the skedaddlers hit them, and you can hit them with the Koopa shells, and you can also hit them with the elephant power up. So it's just a nice little way of sort of having this level like have something unique about it. And speaking of unique setups, over to the right there you can see the background area with the switching on-off blocks, which is just I think an awesome setup, honestly. Like. Not to toot my own horn too much, but it's just, I really love the way that ended up working out, and also how it ties into the second purple 10 coin. I just really love this section, honestly. Also how I bring back the vertically moving on-off blocks. Yeah, it's just, it's really cool, honestly. Let me see if I can actually do this. This section here can actually be a bit tricky, but there we go. And this skedaddler here is kind of just pointless to... this section just needed to be very long horizontally in order to justify this second purple 10 coin there. You can actually still technically get this if you're like really quick and you time things really well with the switching on-off blocks. However, obviously the intentional way of getting in there is by jumping onto this Skeblaster and then going into the pipe here. And now we're all the way over here, so let me make sure, you have to make sure that the blue blocks are actually activated once you leave that room, because that allows you to go over here to get the second purple 10 coin. There we go. Also, if it wasn't obvious, this Skeblaster here is getting spawned repeatedly, so that way there's no way of like things messing up if you wait too long. It will just reset basically that setup. That acorn there spawns some more coins, like I talked about earlier. There's just a lot of stuff like that throughout this level. Also, I took damage because I wasn't paying attention. There's actually a lot of different hidden blocks like those throughout the level as well, but I'm not going to show all of those because that would get kind of boring, I suppose. And here we go, time for the Wonder effect. I imagine you've already seen this, but if not, then wow, look at this amazing Wonder effect setup. Like I talked about during the time-lapse, it's both like a very custom-looking setup, but also it's a very simple, or at least relatively like not complicated thing to set up in terms of actual like design or whatever. But I still think it looks very visually interesting, of course, and it's also just a fun gameplay mechanic, like how here, for example, just the cool thing is that you can't easily like kill the skedaddlers, because that way it gets rid of the platform. So that's just like a nice little like trade-off from a gameplay perspective, is that you don't actually want to kill the skedaddlers, because then you can't stand on those sections anymore. So I guess I also sort of make use of that in this section here, where I also managed to reintroduce the on-off blocks. There we go. Oh, I messed that up. I guess we're gonna have to sort of get rid of you and then hope he respawns, because once again there is a skedaddler spawner up top there. There we go. Now we can give that another shot. Over here, it's just like a very simple idea here where you have to kill the skedaddlers in order to progress. So it sort of takes advantage of that thing I mentioned earlier about how you have to be careful, like I clearly am not doing right now. And I also really like this here, where you're sort of like baited into killing this skedaddler, or at least walking over here, but that would actually get rid of the platform, so you want to sort of be careful there. And this here is also very cool, where you can't hit the on-off block unless you make the skedaddler move out of the way. But here we go, this is the end of the section. The idea here is that you block that skedaddler from moving on, but you can also not do that if you want, and you can just keep going. And yeah, that worked out pretty well, that Wonder effect section did, I think. Also, God, that Koopa spawned a bit close there. Maybe I shouldn't have that Koopa spawning there, because that could actually go kind of wrong. So the reason there's a Koopa over here is because we can use it to activate this on-off block setup here. There is also another Koopa over to the right there, just to make sure that if you kill the first Koopa, you can still do this this stuff here. So here we go. This is a bit simple. Like it's kind of not as complicated as the second purple tank coin, but I don't think the secrets necessarily have to be like progressively more complicated or whatever. I think that's fine. Let me see if I can actually do this. There we go. Getting all those blocks to actually line up at the same time can be pretty difficult. But yeah, there we go. That's the end of the level. I do actually want to show the non-wonder version of that earlier section as well, though. Okay, so realistically, I don't know why anyone wouldn't grab the Wonder Flower here. It's like very obvious and like hard to miss. But in case you do ignore it, you can just progress normally, of course. And yeah, we have a bit of a different section here. Wait, let me actually do that. There we go. Yeah, nothing special really. There's just some different setups. Like here, there's normally a brick block in the wall there during the Wonder effect, but I replaced that with another small Skeblaster. And then here there's a bit of a strange on-off block setup, I guess. Oh, okay, I've never done that before. That was funny. The idea is sort of that you can like lure the Skedaddler to different sides and maybe kill it with the Koopa shell, but I guess that also worked. And then, yeah, here we have a bit more of the Skeblaster acorn jumping, which is fine. And then I guess I do a bit more with the on-off block repeatedly activating idea from earlier. Which, yeah, I think this is a fine evolution of the mechanics as well. It's maybe, well, it's obviously not as interesting as what happens during the Wonder effect, but at least it's still something, and then this section here is mostly the same. I did add this block here, because why not? I guess I wanted there to be something for you to do in this section, because it's otherwise it's pretty empty, honestly. And like I talked about earlier, you can also use this Koopa shell here to get this bonus room instead, but we don't need that right now. So yeah guys, I guess that's gonna do it for this video. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing or whatever. I also have a Discord server and you can sign up for channel memberships or that kind of stuff. But thank you guys so much for watching, see you later and bye bye!